I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything.
Elon Musk owns BBC leftist journalist who is literally unable to come up with examples when pressed on hate speech claims on Twitter and instead says, "Let's move on." Well, it looks like the smartest man in the world has outsmarted a snobby, leftist, virtue-signaling D-bag journalist in a Twitter Spaces exclusive interview last night hosted by the billionaire. Firstly, the leftist D-bag claimed to have seen more hate speech on his For You feed, then claiming that he didn't even use the For You feed when pressed by Elon Musk, which then led to Elon asking the leftist D-bag a multitude of questions ranging from, can you give me examples of hate speech that you claim to have seen, and also talking about the COVID misinformation the BBC has put out. None of those questions were ever answered, instead leaving the D-bag leftist journalist stumbling and mumbling. It is very obvious that this leftist douchebag journalist is used to getting his way with the old Twitter, as he was just embarrassed in front of tens of thousands of people in the Twitter Spaces event. Roll the tape.
Say there's not enough people to police this stuff, particularly around hate speech in the company. Is that something that you want to address?
What hate speech are you talking about? I mean, you use Twitter,
right?
Do you see a rise in hate speech?
I mean,
but just a personal anecdote. Like, what do you? I don't.
Personally, my For You, I would see I get more of that kind of content. Yeah, personally, but I'm not going to talk to the rest of for the rest of Twitter.
You see more hate speech personally.
I would say I would see more hateful content in that.
Content you don't like or hateful? What do you mean to describe a hateful thing?
Yeah, I mean, just content that will solicit a reaction, something that may include something that is slightly racist or slightly sexist, those kinds of things.
So you think if something is slightly sexist, it should be banned?
No,
is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying anything. I'm saying.
I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what you mean by hateful content. I'm asking for specific examples, and you just said that if something is slightly sexist, that's hateful content. Does that mean that it should be banned?
Well, you've asked me whether my feed, whether it's got less or more. I'd say it's got slightly more.
That's why I'm asking for examples. Can you name one example?
I honestly don't use. Honestly, I don't.
You can't name a single example.
I'll tell you why. Because I don't actually use that For You feed anymore, because I just don't particularly like it.
And
actually, a lot of people are quite similar. I only look at my following.
You said you've seen more hateful content, but you can't name a single example, not even one.
I'm not sure I've used that feed for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and
how did you see the hateful content?
Because I've been using Twitter since you've taken it over for the last 6 months.
Okay, so then you must have at some point seen the For You hateful content. I'm asking for one example.
Right.
And you can't give a single one.
And I'm saying
I say, sir, that you don't know what you're talking about.
Really?
Yes, because you can't give me a single example of hateful content, not even one tweet, and yet you claimed that the hateful content was high.
Well,
that's false.
No, what I claimed.
You just lied.
What I claimed was there are many organizations that say that kind of information is on the rise. Now, whether it has on my feed or not, I mean, right, and you can look at something like the Strategic Dialogue Institute in the UK. They will say that. So
look, people will say all sorts of nonsense. I'm literally asking for a single example, and you can't name one.
Right, and as I've already said, I don't use that feed. But
then how would you know that?
I don't think this is getting anywhere.
You literally said you experienced more hateful content, and then couldn't name a single example.
Right, and as I said,
that's absurd.
I haven't actually looked at that feed.
Then how would you know there's hateful content?
Because I'm saying that's what I saw a few weeks ago. I can't give you an exact example. Let's move on. We only have a certain amount of time. COVID misinformation. You changed the COVID misinformation.
Has BBC changed its COVID misinformation?
The BBC does not set the rules on Twitter, so I'm asking you.
No, I'm talking about the BBC's misinformation about COVID.
I'm literally asking you about, you changed the labels, the COVID misinformation labels. There used to be a policy, it then disappeared. Why do that?
Well, COVID is no longer an issue. does the BBC hold itself at all responsible for misinformation regarding masking and side effects of vaccinations, and not reporting on that at all? And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
This is not an interview about the BBC.
Oh, so. You thought it wasn't?
I see now why you've done Twitter Spaces. I am not a representative of the BBC's editorial policy. I want to make that clear. Let's talk about something else. You want to talk about the BBC? All right, let's talk about.
Now, as you heard, that quite possibly was one of the worst outcomes that D-bag leftist journalist could have gotten, and he was completely embarrassed. He looked completely a fool, and it just goes to show you that leftist D-bag journalists truly only open their mouths without any examples of what they're actually claiming.